Good afternoon, Year 7. Welcome to another poem in the Identity Poetry series. This time we're going to be looking at a poem that was written in the 1950s. But before we get on to it, here's actually a line from it. Ears like bomb and teeth like splinters. I love that line. Just draw a picture of his face. Just spend 5 minutes drawing how you think a face would look like if it had ears like bombs and teeth like splinters. The poem is called Timothy Winters by a chap called Charles Causley. So our title is Timothy Winters by Charles Causley. Right, here is a glossary of words. That means it's a list of words that you might not know. Well, you probably won't know because some of these words come from way back. Football balls were something that were around before the lottery, but they fulfilled the same purpose. People would guess how many goals were going to be scored on Saturday in all the football matches combined, I think, and then and you would win lots of money if you got it right. But basically think of it as being like the lottery. The Blitz was when the Germans bombed England, more specifically London, the East End of London, during the Second World War. For 6 weeks they just came over and dropped millions of tons of bombs on the East End of London specifically, and the rest of London unrelentingly. Breeches are just trousers. The welfare state is where you go nowadays. It's called social security. It's where you go if you lose your job and you can't afford to feed your children or whatever. A bombardier is a soldier, an aspirin is a painkiller medicine, and hell's our Cornish word for the sound of a cow crying in alarm. And amen, you probably know that one, but it literally means it is so. And we're going to go through each stanza of the poem, and by now you know the stanzas as like the verses. And then after each stanza, answer this question: what does this stanza tell us about Timothy? Timothy Winters comes to school with eyes as wide as a football pool, ears like bombs and teeth like splinters, a blitz of a boy is Timothy Winters. So what does this stanza tell us about Timothy? A blitz of a boy? We know that the Blitz is when the Germans aerial bombed London, as we said on the previous slide. So we could argue, and I think successfully, that Timothy Winters is a sort of product of that time. You know, if he's at school in the 1950s, he would have been like a baby during the Blitz. So he's to some degree traumatized by what's gone on in his life, in his short life so far. A blitz of a boy, that is a metaphor, of course. And why do you think he's called him a blitz of a boy? Well, we've just covered that, haven't we? So annotate your poem and move on to the next slide. His belly is white, his neck is dark, and his hair is an exclamation mark. His clothes are enough to scare a crow, and through his breeches the blue winds blow. What does this tell us about tell the reader about Timothy, and why that adjective blue? Have a think about that and annotate your poem. When teacher talks he won't hear a word, and he shoots down dead the arithmetic bird. He licks the pattern off his plate, and he's not even heard of the welfare state. So what does this tell us about Timothy? Well, he's there's the metaphor first of all there, and he shoots down dead the arithmetic bird. In other words, he's a troublesome child in the class, isn't he? He's probably making lots of noise and full of traumatized energy and definitely not learning anything. He licks the pattern off his plate because he's so hungry. He's not even heard of the welfare state. So the welfare state was brand new in the 1950s, but so it didn't reach a lot of people like it does now. So we're getting the idea that this boy lives in extreme poverty. Timothy Winters has bloody feet, and he lives in a house on Suez Street. He sleeps in a sack on the kitchen floor, and they say there aren't boys like him anymore. Well, who's they? Who are they that say that? They're going to be the people in newspapers or politicians who say, the war's over, we're rebuilding the country, there aren't boys living in this type of poverty anymore, the welfare state will look after them. But this poem's telling us that that's not the case. This boy, to coin a modern phrase, he's fallen through the net, hasn't he? There's no support around him at all. Him and his family are clearly traumatised by the Blitz, and they're living in this kind of horrible house where he sleeps on the floor on a kitchen sack, probably not got any light or heating. And here's his dad, look, old man Winters likes his beer, and his missus ran off with a bombardier. Grandma sits in the grate with a gin, and Timothy's dosed with an aspirin. So his dad's getting drunk every night, his grandma's sitting there sipping gin in this, you can't blame him, it sounds incredibly grim, and they give him an aspirin, which is like a headache pill, but it might calm him down a bit, I suppose. The welfare worker lies awake, but the law's as tricky as a 10-foot snake. So Timothy Winters drinks his cup and slowly goes on growing up. Welfare worker is somewhere what would now probably be called a social worker, who would have been allocated to try and sort Timothy Winters out before he grows up and becomes a serious problem, which he will do if he's got no education and he's traumatised. But the law's as tricky as a 10-foot snake. That's a simile. What does it tell us about the welfare worker's job? It tells us that it's a very hard job to do, isn't it? To get through to this family and somehow get this boy into a better position. But he's growing up all the time. He's getting bigger all the time, and consequently, potentially more troublesome for himself and everybody else. At morning prayers, the master howls for children less fortunate than ourselves, and the loudest response in the room is when Timothy Winters roars, "Amen." What does this tell us about Timothy? That verb this verb, roars, is an onomatopoeia. What does it tell us about Timothy? That he roars, "Amen," with his hair like, what is it? Teeth like splinters and ears like bombs. This is, an unhappy child, I think, an angry one. So come one angel, come on 10. Timothy Winters says Amen, 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 Amen. Timothy Winters, Lord, Amen. This is repetition. Why has the poet repeated Timothy Winters saying Amen 5 times, do you think? And then the last half of Amen, which is kind of for Timothy Winters, isn't it really? There is a different meaning behind this last Amen. How does it change the whole poem? Is this still a poem? Some interesting questions for you to answer there. Now, we discussed earlier on that this is a poem, it's a didactic poem. It's a poem that wants to tell you something very specifically. Do you think that Timothy Winters is just one boy? Do you think it's based on just one boy? Or could it be based on a whole generation of boys who were very young through the Blitz? I'm guessing he's about 11 or 12 now, so if it's 19, yeah, he would have been like a small child through the Blitz. So do you think that Timothy Winters is one boy? When do you think Timothy Winters was alive? Well, we know that, don't we? Victorian times in 1800s. First World War, 1914. But in fact, as we've already said, he's a child in the 1950s after the Second World War. Why is it important for the reader to know this, do you think? Just write a little response to that. Now you're going to write an analytical paragraph, which is essentially a peel paragraph, and this is the thing that I want you to put onto Classcharts for me to have a look at. A blitz of a boy is Timothy Winters is the quote that I've taken. So the writer uses a metaphor in the line "a blitz of a boy" present Timothy Winters looking like a mess. The word blitz is connected with bombing in the war. It suggests to the reader that everything about Timothy is broken and a mess, like a bomb has exploded and he's been caught up in it. So I want you to pick another quotation from the poem, do an analysis like that, of about that length, and put it onto Classcharts, and I'll have a look at it and reward you with achievement points as usual. So well done, Year 7. Fantastic work. I'll speak to you tomorrow.